The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
Welcome to Planting Seeds, Philanthropy in Saskatchewan, a show where we connect you to the donors and charities making an impact across the prairies. I'm your host, Victor Roman Morrow, with the South Sask Community Foundation. I hope you enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us today. Today I'm joined, actually once again, you might notice Colleen from an older episode, but Colleen Strauch is with me here from Luther College with the Nonprofit and Voluntary Sector Studies Network, or NVSSN, as we will say for short, so nobody needs to memorize that.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining me here,
Thank
Colleen.
you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, can you just remind people a bit about your role with Luther over there?
Absolutely. So at Luther College at the University of Regina, we have a program called the NVSSN. And my work really centers around supporting a thriving nonprofit and voluntary sector in Saskatchewan. And we do so kind of in a couple ways. The first is through an academic certificate program in nonprofit sector leadership and innovation. And then the second is through the broader network that aims to support learning and research and capacity building in the nonprofit sector in Saskatchewan.
Perfect. And I'll give some more context to how you've done that, not just in the classroom, but beyond. So today's episode is a bit of a different episode than regular, because usually I'll have a guest on like yourself and you'll tell us about your organization. You've already done that. So if people want to go back to see in the archive, or maybe it runs as a rerun, you might actually see Colleen's episode and learn more about the NVSSN over there. But what we want to talk about today, and this is something that I feel like I bring up almost every episode, which is our Growing Futures report that we've done at the foundation, and you were heavily involved in that as well. So what I want to do first, before we kind of get in the discussion, is today we're going to just spend the full time going through that report, what our community foundation does for research, and most specifically, we want to talk about what we're hearing from the charitable sector and what their needs are, and what we're starting to do moving forward a bit as a group. So for the sake of the audience, I'll kind of say this to you, and I know this is reiterating. Well, we met back in 2022, and the reason why was because both of our organizations had a desire to participate in research around truly understanding the most pressing needs that our community is facing, and how the charitable sector fits in within that. So for full context, our community foundation, primarily we're a funder. We fund, we work with donors and giving individuals who want to help the charitable sector. So we're kind of that trusted expert in the middle who holds the funds. We have third parties who manage those funds, and then we distribute them as grants out to the charities. So that's that financial impact. My role, though, I'm the director of impact, and what that essentially means is my role is to try to make sure that during that process that we're making the most impact, we're making the most efficiency, we're doing the best work we can with those donations and with the charities as well. So a lot of that comes to just first understanding what do charities need, and what are the challenges they're facing, and then how can we work towards solutions for those challenges. So as I've mentioned many times on this show, we have the Growing Futures report. It can be viewed online at growingfuturesreport.ca. And what that is it's part of an initiative that we do with Community Foundations of Canada, which is kind of the governing body. We're one community foundation here within Saskatchewan, but there's over 200 across the country. And all 200 plus of us are connected to the Community Foundations of Canada, and they have a research initiative called Vital Signs. So what it is about 150 community foundations across the province, across the country participate, and every single report is unique. It's all done at a local level. So for example, Edmonton's foundation recently did one specifically focused on homelessness within Edmonton. Just as one example. So ours, we cover a region, that South Saskatchewan region, so we're kind of looking at, the lower half of the province. And we were trying to discover, okay, not just one topic, because we have such a broad audience, what's broadly impacting the charitable sector in our communities. And that's where you and I kind of came in together. We decided that Luther and the NVSSN would be a perfect partner to help us with this report. So the Community Foundation led our Growing Futures report in 2023, but Luther definitely played a huge role in bringing that to life in meaningful ways. And some of the ways that are really interesting. So if you go to that website, growingfuturesreport.ca.
It's an amazing website.
And it's an amazing website, though, partially because of your intervention. Because what Colleen actually did is Colleen connected us with a software engineering class at the University of Regina. So that class full of students, the entire class spent an entire semester from January to April that year, taking our Vital Signs initiative and figuring out how can this be told better online through a website experience. So we had tons of students just invested in this project in the charitable sector for months to bring that to life. And then we were actually lucky, we actually hired one of the students from that class to then finish the project in real life. And by the end of that summer, have something ready for us to use for the report. And just too much information is that employee, Brooklyn, actually still works with us today. So it was kind of cool.
It's amazing.
We were able to connect students in a way that's really gone further than I think even I expected. So now that's the report itself. I want to talk really briefly about what was in that report, and then we can kind of have a back and forth just about some of the things that we've done since the report has come out.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So, we surveyed the charitable sector. We had a lot of responses, and then there was a lot more outreach to gather stories and things like that, which you can see in the report. And the themes that were coming out really strongly from the sector that we talked to was that there's a huge need. These are kind of the focus areas. There's a need for safe and affordable housing. There's a huge need to increase food security. We're seeing more and more people need to use food banks in Saskatchewan than ever before. There's a need to increase kind of the quality and the access to mental health services around substance use and suicide prevention, and there's some overlap there as well. A big one that was really interesting to me was that aging infrastructure is having a very large impact on the charitable sector as well. And that, anybody at any time knows, when you go outside and you see your roads are falling apart or there's businesses and buildings that are falling apart, the reality is nonprofit organizations need to use those buildings too, but their funding isn't flexible. It is very hard to take care of a place that is falling apart. And that place that's falling apart has a real impact on their ability to do their work and also their patrons' ability to have access to a building that is safe and comfortable depending on what work they're doing. And then the last piece that really tied everything together in my mind is there's a need to address funding gaps. So we've got all these big challenges, but one of the biggest challenges is that the charitable sector and charities are being faced with increased costs, increased demand of work, but they are not getting increased funding, which means that their employees aren't getting paid enough, that there's employee burnout, which is turning into more staff turnover, which is making it harder and harder to do the missions that they're doing a good job at, but there really is a lack of resources that's making it difficult to do the best job possible. And that is a lot of challenges.
For sure.
And when we put together that report, and I'm sure you can attest to it, it's pretty glooming when you just read it like that. But I would encourage people to go to the site again, growingfuturesreport.ca, because it is glooming, but there are people that are doing really good work towards this. And we have stories of hope on there that kind of show what are the charities doing and how have donors been involved. And just from your perspective, you work with charities a lot. So when we talk about that, safe and affordable housing, food security, the need for mental health assistance, have you heard a lot of that from the individuals you work with as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have so many amazing nonprofit organizations that are supporting our community in some of their most challenging moments and supporting those who are most vulnerable. And I think, like you said, it's worth mentioning the amazing work that they're doing. And typically with limited resources, limited staff capacity, but with a tremendous amount of passion and heart to support those folks in our communities. And yes, I would just say, we know that those needs are increasing, the ones that you mentioned. And that's why I think this was an awesome partnership, because producing research and creating that website that you folks created helps to demonstrate to community those needs and challenges that are taking place in our communities, and just highlight the needs for both donors to give to those causes, and also just to have shared data on the things that are taking place and going on in our communities, so that we can build awareness, and then from that awareness kind of take action. And from our end, it's also getting students involved in organizations that are supporting work in those areas. So for example, Regina Food for Learning, which I know was one that was highlighted in the report as well. We had students, do an internship to support the work that organization is doing to address food security in Regina and area. So all that to say that the report has really just leveraged that research to create more awareness, I think, and highlight again the success stories and the amazing things that are happening. Because there are so many amazing things, and I think it's worth celebrating also the impactful work that's going on, despite the fact that it can be overwhelming, like you say. But I think there's it's really important also to celebrate the work that goes on and the heart that people have in our community, because it allows us to keep going when we see that inspirational work happening, I think. So
absolutely. And and it's there's so much good that is being given to by people too as well, through whether it be donations, like monetary donations, or volunteering, whether it be on boards or helping with like the operational needs, delivering food packages, for example. Things like that are definitely things that people are doing. However, we have seen that volunteerism has decreased over a few years. So this is, again, another thing I see every episode, is that if you're looking to volunteer, like there's no better time than now, and figure out something that you're really passionate about to do.
For sure. One
thing I want to touch on really quickly too before we leave the topic, and this will actually come into the first conversation we had, though, is that, we talk about food security, we talk about housing, we talk about mental health. Those are very core structural pieces to anybody's well-being. It's hard to have good mental health if you don't have a safe shelter, safe roof over your head. And it's really hard to have good mental health if you're hungry. And one of the pieces in the report that comes through, and we have a good graphic in there, and it's really trying to figure out, like, all these things are so intertwined. And what is really in the center of them, especially over the past few years, is there's been such a huge increase in cost of living. So I know some of the stats that really demonstrate that. It was about the average mortgage payment for, not mortgage payment, over the span of a year, the average mortgage was costing about $4,000 more for the average family. Well, at the same time, groceries were looking at increasing about $1,000 more per year. So suddenly you've got people who, if you're someone that didn't just have $5,000 lying around each year, now you're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I afford just these basic things I have? And then that's when you get in that situation where people that are just on that brink suddenly have to choose between paying for food and rent. And there's the huge risks there of losing your housing and not being able to eat enough, and everything that comes from there. And then the mental health stresses that come from living in that environment are huge. And then that's where we see, people that are in those situations that you need that support, they're going to the charitable sector. They're going to Canadian Mental Health Association. They're going to wherever it is that they can. And they're in a situation where they're struggling because, their buildings are falling apart. Their infrastructure is falling apart. And there's more and more people now, as we can see, that cost of living bubble has caused a situation where more and more people need their services. But their funding has not gone up. So they're just attempting to do more with less is really what happens. But I want to also highlight, just before we get into more detail, that those focus areas are core, they're crucial, but they aren't the only ones. And people need to remember that too. So there's always a worry that, if everybody shifts their focus and primarily does this, then, people with accessibility needs might get overlooked, or, the arts might get overlooked too.
Mm-hmm.
And what I always try to tell people is there's a path, and it's not a straight line, but at some point in that path, every part of the charitable sector is making your community a better place to live. So the core are these challenges. You need to take care of those, but don't forget, it's like someone's mental health, for example, once they're in that safe spot, they still need something to be passionate about. They need those arts, they need those sports, they need to find something that they really care about, that they want to be part of, that brings them a sense of community as well. Yeah. And then they also, like we need things like we need environmental initiatives, we need a clean city, we need something to be proud of. So all of that, it's all connected on this path.
Absolutely.
But right now we are saying that if there's ever a time to make sure that core is supported, it's now.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that this is something that we talk a lot about in our certificate in nonprofit sector leadership, is understanding more about the interconnectedness of these challenges and the systemic barriers that lead to these challenges as well. And try to take that holistic approach, like you said, infrastructure, well-being, that is directly, like you said, connected to access to the arts and sports and recreation, which impacts mental health, which impacts, the other pieces. It's all a big interconnected puzzle. And so helping students of all ages that might take our certificate program understand how those things are interconnected and how that then impacts the sector, like you said, because these larger kind of systemic changes and evolutions in funding and costs, like you said, will impact the buildings. And even being in a space that is, crumbling when you are facing major challenges, it also impacts kind of your experience and your interest in attending those programs, right? And so, I think that's definitely a big part of what we want to highlight and help students understand, because they will play a role in navigating those challenges in their work. And that's why I think this report is so important, because again, we've used this report so many times to leverage that data to help navigate these conversations in our community, both with students, with charitable organizations, and for you folks with donors, and just kind of also as a piece of conversation that we can use at the community level for how can we build from here, and what can we do to collectively to address those challenges. Because I think really with those big systemic challenges that we face, it does really require that collective action, right? And that's why Luther has partnered so well, I think, with South Sask, because we have that shared interest in addressing those collective challenges for the charitable and nonprofit sector, and for thinking about ways that we could build a better future, thinking about the folks in our communities that are being served by the nonprofit sector, right? And that's, like we've said, so broad and so diverse. It's anyone from children who are in sporting activities to seniors accessing seniors programming, and kind of everyone in between who might be having the best day or one of the most challenging days of their lives, right?
100%. And to even add to that too, from like a viewer's perspective, who, like, if you're not that person, it has an impact on all of us. And the reason why is because, if you want, let's just use downtown, not just for Regina or other communities, but it's just a fact across kind of the country and beyond, that downtowns are struggling. And they're struggling for multiple reasons. A big part of it too is, as homelessness goes up, there's more homelessness downtown. That makes some people feel uncomfortable. There's a stigma around that too. So then it's harder for businesses to thrive. So if you want like a healthy downtown, and you want businesses to thrive, and you want to feel comfortable in your community, then you also want homeless people to be taken care of and for their quality of lives to be better, because it actually has a direct impact on your own quality of life as well. Like, that's just the reality of living in a community, is that we're all community members, right? So that's one thing I always like to remind people too, is that there's a broader impact that impacts all of us, no matter what kind of socioeconomic status, whatever your personal life looks like. The reality is your community is stronger when everybody is stronger.
Yeah, I
And
couldn't
I think
agree
that
more.
anchors everything.
Totally.
Now, I want to go into a little bit of the action then, because this report is a report, but it doesn't do anything if it just sits on a shelf. So that's kind of the next step, is what do we do with it? So from the Community Foundation standpoint, we have a small funding opportunity for it. Admittedly, I don't think I would be saying this, it's my personal opinion, but I think at the foundation we talk about it as well. It's not a big enough opportunity. It's one of the smallest ones we have, and we're working towards growing it.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, just as an example, when we talk about the infrastructure, one of the things we were able to actually fund for an organization was Sign Yorkton. They're an organization that helps there in many ways, but their like front door was busted down, and like they had no funding for it. They couldn't find funding to fix it. But that like busted down door letting air in all winter also meant that their like heating bill was just like through the roof.
Right.
So by finally being able to get funding to fix that from us, it in the long term is actually saving them money, because now they have like a realistic heating bill because their door just works, and because their door just works, their building looks more welcoming, and because their building looks more welcoming, people are more comfortable using it and using their services. So like that one door had a huge impact.
Of course.
Well, I think from the donor's perspective, a lot of times you want to make sure it's like, well, I want to give to like the programs. It's like, yeah, but by giving to this, you're actually having a huge impact on the programs, even though at the surface level, it might not look as desirable, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and then the other piece, so that's just one example of the funding that came out of there. But the other bigger piece that we felt like we have more of an opportunity to have more influence in is bringing the sector together to collaborate. And that's both from the charity side of things and the donor side of things. So what we did is we took this, we had what we call a vital conversation back in September. And I don't believe you helped organize this one, but you participated in this one. So you can
Yeah,
talk
it was a
about
great
from this
event.
one. And you did help organize the one after. But I want to talk to that one first. So back in September, what we did is we've got these focus areas, we've heard. Now we want to figure out a next step. So we decided, just with our current capacity, we want to work with Regina groups first and bring them together to say, okay, how can we collaborate more on this? So we looked at groups working with food security, with housing, with mental health. And then we also looked at some organizations that are serving people from like a disability standpoint. And the really short of it, and this is available on the website though, and we're gonna just zoom through this because I wanna focus on the other one. But they noted to us, a big thing was really they wanted to focus on those funding gaps. They talked about the fact that their funding and capacity is making it hard to succeed. So, you know, there's more competition, there's more people applying for grants, but the grant money isn't going up. There's a misalignment in funding too. So, you know, you can get grants for programs, but you can't get grants for that door to fix sort of thing, even though that would have a bigger impact. That lack of funding is making it hard to retain staff, pieces like that. So they're really, another call to action is with funders. They wanted to look at funders to think about covering those operational costs, those things that you just need to have to keep the doors open, and understand the impact that they have, which hopefully the story even tells a little bit of.
Yeah.
And then also asking more collaboration within with funders themselves too. And then just from the Community Foundation standpoint too, they were asking us to look at ways that we can be a better connector, and how we can do some advocacy and speak on their behalf. So again, this episode is honestly kind of that piece.
Yeah.
So that's a really short version of this, and I don't want to miss just spending the last couple minutes here talking about what we did together here in March. So the next step to that was bringing funders together. So we were in a really good situation where we were actually able to bring the charitable sector. We had about 50 people in the room between charities and City of Regina representatives, which included council members, the mayor, and some of their administrative staff. So we actually got them to sit down, work together in groups between both the funder and charities in this aspect, and come up with solutions together. So I'm just going to run through some of these, and again, these are all available on the website. But we want to look at how they can work better together. So, having more meetings like that was a big one. there's a bunch, but one that I really want to focus on, and actually I'm going to go through all these because I want to just end focusing on this one. So there was the need again to fund those core operations and ask the city to fund in that way as a donor, which would take some policy change potentially. There was everything around asking for help to enhance their own space and staffing, to increase volunteerism, to build their capacity in a lot of ways, and to figure out how the city can be involved in advocacy as well, and increasing awareness of the investment into charities and the impact that has on your city. But one of the pieces that I really want to talk about before we go, because it's kind of the first piece I think that could come out of this, which is creating a roadmap for coordination. And what I liked about this one is it's all focused on kind of understanding where every charity is, who's already working together, who's working towards what, and then where are the gaps. So if we have that, then we can start to understand, okay, here's where we can collaborate more. Here's where not enough is being done. Here's a giant gap that we need to figure out how to fill, and become more strategic, starting as a city, but then going more broad with that sort of strategy. And just kind of briefly, before we wind down, can you tell a bit about, you helped facilitate that meeting, from kind of your experience with that meeting as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's honestly, you folks are doing a fantastic job, and it's great to collaborate and partner. And again, with that shared interest in supporting this charitable sector. And I agree that it's continuously coming out in these conversations that I have and that we have and that you have with folks in the sector, that there is that need for coordination and collaboration, and then really finding those gaps. And I think kind of connecting back to that Vital Signs report and the Growing Futures website is highlighting what's being done, collecting that data so we know what's going on, what's going well, what's missing. And then I think this is really that next piece. So now we kind of know what those charitable sector and nonprofit sector needs are, and how can we now take what we know and move it to the next action item, like you said, not just a report living on the shelf, but moving into that space of how can we, as both two organizations that have that interest in supporting a thriving sector, move into that space where we say, okay, let's serve and support in a way that can help these organizations continue to deliver their mandate without having to think about like that larger big picture conversation, because we can kind of support by aiming to bridge gaps, of course, driven by the needs of the sector and those leaders and what they're telling us, but kind of serving in that way to help support coordination of those services, and mainly identifying where the gaps are so that we can ideally support funding in those areas and capacity building, right?
So. Absolutely. And we got to wind down now, unfortunately. I feel like I talked about this for another hour.
But sure.
For viewers, if you're interested, again, to learn more, visit that growingfuturesreport.ca. If you're looking to give towards this sort of more overarching initiative as well, you can give there. Or, as always, look at giving to the charities that you know are making a difference, that are really passionate towards you. And I just want to thank you again, Colleen, for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's always great to be here.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you'd like to learn more about the Community Foundation's Vital Signs research, visit growingfuturesreport.ca and learn more there, or see how you can get involved yourself. Thank you.
If you'd like to share your feedback on the program you just watched, contact us today.